Boker Tov, Moadim L'Simcha, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Samach in Bab Mציעא. As we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Atzon B'Asar V'Shivya, and we also learned for Ilui Neshama of Chaim Tzvi ben Shalom Cooperman, whose yahrzeit is tonight. So we'll start with the Mishnah at the bottom of Nun Testament Bays. Rav Meir Shapiro. Again, we're talking about fraud, a continuation of fraud, no. And another kind of fraud is when you mix different kinds of produce. Peiros here doesn't mean fruits literally, it means grains, all kinds of produce, meaning a person bought from you produce from field A and you gave him produce from field B, or mixed up because you're cheating him. He wanted, the deal was to buy produce from A, and you gave him a produce from A and B, maybe not the same. That's not what he wanted. That wasn't the deal. You're cheating him. Even if they're both new, they're both relatively new, the same age. The process is the produce are both the same age. You might say, well, these are the same ages. These are the same aging, the same equivalent. No, you can't do that because the deal was for one, not to the other. Certainly, if instead of older produce, the older produce might be worth more to this purchaser. Why? Because he wants to grind it up, use it for cooking, for baking, etc. So the old drier stuff makes flour easier. He doesn't want the new stuff. So certainly you can't mix up new with old, and we'll talk about that. In other words, he wanted the particular produce that was aged to a certain degree, and you're giving him other stuff mixed in with it. That's cheating. Be'emes amru. In truth, they said. We'll see in the Gemara. Whenever the Gemara says be'emes amru, the Mishnah, whatever else it means, that's the halacha. B'yayin hitivtor lav kosher. With wine, if it's still in the process at the wine presses where you're making the wine, you can mix up. You're allowed to stir together strong wine with milder wine, neishu mashpicho, because you're improving it. In other words, if it's still in the process of being made, the wine is being processed, and you mix up some old one with, in other words, more stronger wine with milder wine, that's okay because it improves it. Now we'll see that's only what in the wine press. You can't mix up the sediments with wine. When you sell the wine, you can't just throw sediments in there. But you could put the sediment in. So this seems to be a steer minei ubei. What do you mean? You don't mix up the sediment with the wine, but you could put in its sediment. What does that mean? The Gemara will explain. Let's say some water got mixed up with your wine. In those days, the wine was always undiluted, so you usually had to put some water in there. So if you put some water in the wine, making it more drinkable, because you shouldn't sell it in a store. In other words, you shouldn't sell it into a store to a storekeeper, a shopkeeper, as if it's regular undiluted wine, because you're cheating him. You're giving him really less wine. You're giving him some water. Obviously, the water is worth a lot less. So you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't sell it a little bit at a time because you're cheating him. You're selling it as undiluted. Makom shenago below the tager. You shouldn't sell it to a merchant who sells to other stores. Even though you let him know, because the merchant's not going to bother telling the storekeepers. He's just going to sell it as is. A wholesaler doesn't care about those details. You shouldn't sell it in a store or to a store or in a store unless you let the people know. But to a merchant who sells to many stores, even if you let him know, you shouldn't do it because he's going to sell it as undiluted. If the minhag was in that place, the custom was to put water into the wine, meaning they would sell it in a more drinkable fashion. You could do that. If that's that's whatever they do. If the minhag is it's sold that way, it's done that way. A tager nota, similarly, a merchant nota makers can buy from 5 different granaries and put it all into one storehouse, because it's known if you buy from a merchant, it's not like you're buying from a farmer and that you're buying from his farm only. You buy from a merchant, it's well known that as a wholesaler, he buys from many places and mixes them all up. So that's to be expected. That's not cheating. In other words, all these cases are what's fraud and what's not fraud. If you let the guy know what you're doing, it's not fraud. In certain cases, you shouldn't sell to a merchant. You let him know because he's going to sell to others. You're going to be the cause of fraud because he's going to sell to other stores, to many stores without letting them know. Similarly, you could buy, a merchant can buy from 5 different wine presses and put it all into one cask, because it's known when you buy from a wholesaler, you're not getting pure wine from one wine press. You shouldn't have kavana even though the merchant is allowed to buy from 5 different places, 5 vessels and put them into one cask, as long as he's not planning to make bad wine look better. All this, a lot of this is just common sense. What's considered for what's not. Certainly, if the new produce costs more. In other words, it's me'arba, meaning that you get four saw for a sella, and yishenos mishalos, and the old ones, the dried grain is 3 saw for a sella, meaning it's more expensive. Marvin, certainly you can't mix up new grain with old grain that way. Even if the new stuff costs more, to some people the new stuff costs more. Even if the new grain costs more because it's only 3 saw to a sella, and the old ones, the aged ones, get 4 saw sella. Marvin, you don't mix them. They should because the person wants it. Now, even though to some person, the guy who's buying now, let's say, wants to be able to convert the grain into flour almost immediately, right? So you might say, well, there it's understandable. If you put new stuff in there, it's not going to do as well. But even when the new stuff costs more and the old stuff costs less, you still can't mix it up. Why? Because the reason why the new stuff costs more is not because it's better quality. It's simply because the guy wants to age it. He doesn't want to use it now. He's buying now so that Rosh Hashanah, let's say right now, 6 months to Rosh Hashanah, he wants to be able to use it for flour then. So that's why he wants new stuff. That's why the new stuff might be worth more now to him. So it depends. But the guy you're selling to now might want the old stuff right now. So you can't mix either way. You can't mix it no matter what the value is. But in truth, they said with wine, as we'll see, as long as it's still in the wine press stage, you can mix up stronger wine with milder wine, because it improves the milder wine. Amar Blazer, Adam, you see from over here called the emes amru alachi. You see from over here, whenever the Mishnah says the emes amru, in truth they said that's the halacha. Why? And Rashi explains because since he gives the reasoning in the Mishnah at the top of the page, the Mishnah said the emes amru. The he gives a reason for it. So there's no misunderstanding over here. The reason you're allowed to mix up strong wine with mild wine is because it improves it. So when he gives you the reason, there's no svaras. Is it more expensive, less expensive? What he says, it tells you it improves it. So he gives you the reason as if to say that's definitely halacha. And since it says here be'emes amru, in truth they said, you see wherever it says be'emes amru, he's trying to emphasize that that's halacha. Amar Nachman. This is only if you did it in the wine press stage when they're preparing the wine. But if later on, you can't mix them. Once you have let's say wine in the cask form or the bottle form, you can't take old wine and new wine and mix them up together because they're just going to ruin one another. Now, what about now? We see now that they do mix up even after the wine is in the cask stage and they're finished with the wine press, and you see that sellers are allowed to mix them up. Here, because people know about it in their mochel. They know they're getting mixed up wine. Anything which is tasted first, there's no fraud there. In other words, in those days, they didn't come with sealed bottles like we have today or sealed casks. They would always taste it first. So it's tasted, the guy knows what he's getting. He can taste it first to see if he's getting it. And that's why the Gemara says that in the Gemara's time, when the Gemara was written, they were mixing up wine even after the wine press stage. It says you can't mix up sediment of the wine into the wine, but you could give the sediment. What's going on? You can't mix it up at all. Of the komodo, because you let him know. In other words, when you say nosin, maybe it means this. It says you shouldn't throw any sediment of the wine into the wine, but if you let him know, then it's okay. Maybe no say means my avol no saying shmar, but you let him know. But Medicani said saves says like you shouldn't sell it in a store little by little. Elam came money unless you let the people know. Below the tagaraf and you shouldn't sell to merchant even though you let him know. In the sefer we make an afkamina between if you let him know or you didn't let him know, right? That in the you shouldn't sell a store unless you let him know. And with a merchant, you should even letting him know doesn't help. Mash the Reisha, it's not talking about where you let him know. You can't take wine of a different cask and mix the sediments of a different cask and mix it with In other words, in every wine, when you make wine, eventually some of it settles to the bottom, and that's the sediment or the lees, as they call it. That sediment of that cask, if you take that and mix it with the wine of another cask, that will be ruinous to the other cask. So what he's saying is this: you can't take sediment of one cask or one day. He gives an example of yesterday's wine, meaning from a different cask, and mix it with today's wine because you're going to mix it up. We shouldn't mix up yesterday's sediments with today's cask, or today's sediments with yesterday's cask. But you could put some of it, in other words, when you pour out the wine slowly, the sediment stays to the bottom. As a seller, you're entitled that there should be some sediment in that cask. So if you poured out, let's say, a half a cask of wine and all the sediment stayed at the bottom, you're allowed to take some of the sediment and put that into the container that you're selling, the purchaser's container, because he's got to accept that. That's part of the cask. If you pour out wine slowly, you shouldn't mix up yesterday's sediment with today's wine, or today's sediment with yesterday's wine. But you could mix up yesterday's sediment with yesterday's wine and today's sediment with today's wine, because the sediment is part of the cask. So you have to accept that. There's many kinds of liquids that if you let it settle to the bottom, some of the stuff settles to the bottom. And if sometimes that's better stuff. I guess in orange juice, I guess it's better. But if it's wine, you really don't want that stuff. But the purchaser has to take it because that's part of the cask. You shouldn't sell it in a store unless you let the people know. If you let the people know that this is not undiluted wine, it's diluted to some extent, that's okay. You have to let them know. Okay, it says the Gemara now. So if your wine got mixed up with some water, you let the people know. They brought him some wine from a store, undiluted wine, mazge. Now Rava was known to mix a lot of water. Let's say 3 parts water to 1 part wine, and he put some water in there, mazge. Then he tasted wine wasn't good. Even after he diluted it, it didn't taste well. So he returned it. Right? In those days also, money back. He returned the wine back. How can you return it to the store? You shouldn't return it to the store, even if you let him know, because he might cheat. And here you're selling it effectively to a merchant, right? If it's in your own store, you let people know, fine, but you send it back to the merchant. You shouldn't send it back, even though you let him know. Everybody knows. Again, the idea probably like Ravacha. Everybody knows my wine is mixed up with a lot of water. They know, they could taste it. But maybe you'll say, well, maybe the merchant, in order to hide this mixed up with this diluted wine, will add some more wine, right, to make it stronger, so that they won't know that it's yours. And sell it as undiluted wine, even though it's partially diluted, not as diluted as Rava made, but it's partially diluted. And Cain never sold. If you're always worried about the merchant's going to cheat, so even if you sell him water, he might cheat and throw the water into the wine. You can't. There's no end to it. So therefore, you can't be concerned about that. Rava said, I gave him this wine, and everybody knows my wine is diluted, and they'll taste it that way too. If the minig is that they put water into the wine, it means they make it diluted right away. Then whatever the minig is, it depends on the place. Some places they do 50% wine, 50% water. Sometimes it's a third wine and 2/3 water. Sometimes it's 1/4 wine and 3/4 water. Again, this is only good if you do it at the time that the wine is made. But later on, if you do it later on, that's cheating, because then it's not so good anymore. You just can't take it at the table and mix the water in it. It's got to be only at the time that the wine is being processed as it's fermented. Now, another kind of fraud is when you entice little children to come to your store. There's 3 or 4 stores on the street. So one guy says, Rabbi says, you also shouldn't give out little children. You shouldn't give them little, parched grain or nuts. Because in other words, to entice the little children, their mother sent them out to buy a loaf of bread. So you always entice the little children to come into your store by giving them candy or whatever, nuts, whatever. You shouldn't do that. That's cheating. Because you're making them accustomed to come to you. That's an unfair business practice. That's what Rav Yehuda says. You're allowed to do that. Everybody's allowed to have sales and giveaways and get this item free, as we'll see. Say you're allowed to. Also, you shouldn't reduce the price too much. Maybe that'll be a way you're going to entice people by making it cheaper, by lowering the price. Say, what do you mean? You remember for better. You're a good guy. You're bringing down the prices. You're making more stuff available to the market. That's a free market. Lo yivor esagrisin. Let's say you have pounded beans. You shouldn't sift them. Notice when you have beans, there's always chaff mixed up with them. So what you might do is you might sift out all the chaff, so that yours is pure, but you'll raise the price much more than mixed up than original beans. And original beans have some amount of chaff. Everybody knows, okay, it's 10% chaff. I know that. But you might sift out the chaff and then raise the price by 20 or 30% because you're giving clean beans. Shouldn't do that. Say you're allowed to, because the purchaser knows. He's looking at the stuff. He knows, is it with the chaff or is it without the chaff? He'd rather buy with the chaff and sift it himself rather than buy sifted, which costs a lot more. You have that sometimes, right? Like they before Pesach here you could buy a package of 10 pieces of bread for Pedikas Chametz. So 10 like you can't do it yourself. They broke up 10 little pieces for you and charge you, 10 shekels or whatever. They do all kinds of stuff, So a regular purchaser, an educated consumer, like Sai Sims used to say, would know, this stuff is mixed up. I'll rather get the mixed stuff. So I don't have to buy the pure stuff or the salt water. They sell salt water before Pesach too. I can't mix up a little salt in there and charge an arm and a leg for it. Smart guy knows I could buy the water and put a little salt in myself, So the Chum say you're allowed to. All these practices, the Chum say you're allowed to. You're allowed to offer free gifts to the children. You're allowed to lower the price. You're allowed to sell. You're allowed to sift out the bean. The beans, get the chaff out. Maybe somebody will want to pay more for sifted beans. Obviously, people pay for the salt water and for the 10 pieces of bread. There are people who are willing to do that. Let them do it. That you shouldn't just sift out the top level. In other words, it's like you go into these stores where they sell the stuff in sacks, all kinds of grains and stuff in big sacks. So the top level has been cleaned out of chaff and the price is the same. But right below the top level, all the stuff is mixed up down there. That's already cheating. That's fraud. That's good. You're stealing the eye, meaning you're fooling the guy. The eye looks at it. It looks like it's all been sifted out, and it's only the top level is not the rest. You shouldn't paint people, slaves, as we'll see. What do we mean by that? We'll talk about that to make them look new. Or animals, or utensils. Meaning you shouldn't paint anything. Not that you can't paint this, we'll see, but you can't paint anything to fool somebody. I have a cart or a donkey or even a car. You painted it. Oh, it's brand new. It looks brand new. If the guy didn't know the models and stuff like that, but it's really an old car that's just been repainted, right? So you shouldn't do that if it's going to fool people. My time at Rabbanim. What's the reason why the Rabbanim, why they say you're allowed to distribute candy and nuts and things like that to little children to entice them to come into your store? My time at Rabbanim, the Amalei, because they could tell the other guy, you think it's unfair. I'm distributing nuts. And you can distribute plums and do whatever you want. It's a free market out there. I'm enticing with this. You can entice him with that. And you shouldn't lower the price. Like it's a bracha. Not only, in other words, it's not enough to say you're allowed to. You're allowed to also distribute nuts and things like that. Chum say if you lower the price, that's a great thing that you're doing. You're going to be remembered for good. My time at Rabbanan, mishum de kamarach, because you're opening up the market. You're easing the market. You're lowering the market for everybody. That's a great thing that you're doing. You're making the stuff available to all people. Also, you shouldn't sift out the chaff of the beans. Say you're allowed to. Something that could be seen. Now, anybody going into a store will say, is this sifted stuff or not sifted stuff? I'd rather take the unsifted stuff and sift it myself. Or somebody else might say, I'd like the sifted stuff and I'll pay a little extra for it. Misharvit is like a stick or a staff. You shouldn't stiffen the animal, because you stiffen it, as we'll see, it makes it look like its hair stands up. It makes it look like it's stronger, newer, younger. From also, you don't inflate the innards. Put some water like they used to do in the post office. You wanted to, you paid to mail 10,000 flyers, and the guy only prepared 9,000. So how did he give you a bill for 10,000 flyers? Because he took the sacks of the flyers and he put a little water on them. So when they went to the post office said, "Yeah, this looks like 10,000." So you shouldn't inflate the innards. Also, don't soak the meat in water, and obviously your people are paying for water, not for the meat. What do they mean you shouldn't stiffen the animal? What does that mean? Don't stiffen him? What does that mean? Here they said in Bubble, it means like bran broth, meaning they took the bran and cooked it in water, and when you gave that to the animal, his hair like stood up. Mashkanos subin. They know from you give him to drink this bran water, and it expands its stomach. The sourness, in other words, it makes it look bigger, healthier, the animal, and its hair stands up straight. That's like stiffening the animal. That's what they said here. Ziri Amar of Kana Maskafti. You actually brush the animal's hair, make it look stronger, newer, bigger. Shmuel Shara Lamirma Tume Lasarvla. Shmuel allowed people to put fringes on coats, even though to make it look nice. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to make clothes look better. It's okay to do that. That's not fraud. He said you're allowed to put a gloss on colored garments. Rabba Shara Lemedik Sardi. He allowed them to beat canvas garments, and that's also make them look better. Rabba Charlotte Slumagari, he allowed people to color arrows. They had arrows, maybe it was the wood looked old, and they colored them so they looked newer. They're allowed to do it. Or Papa Bar Shmuel, Charlotte Slumatikuli, he allowed people to color baskets. Baskets, when they're colored, look nicer. So it's all those things were allowed. They're considered just, marketing. You can make it look nicer. There's nothing wrong with making it look nicer as long as you're not fooling somebody. How are you allowed to color the baskets? We said you shouldn't color a person or an animal and not utensils, which would include baskets. If it's new or if it's old. If it's new, you're allowed to color it. You're making it look, you're enhancing its look. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it's an old one and you're coloring it in order to make it look new, that's cheating, because then you're giving the impression that it's brand new and it's not. What do you mean coloring a person? How do you color a person? There was an Eved Kanani, Saba, an old one, an old Eved Kanani. If he was old, that means he had white hair, like us. The Azal Saba, he went and he colored his hair, and his beard, right? His beard was white, his hair was white, and he colored it, made look younger. Also came for Rava. Amalei Ziptim, would you buy me? Buy me, don't you need a slave here? Amalei, Yuan Aniyim B'nei Beisfa. Pasuk says that the poor people should be the people of your house, meaning that he says, I would rather support Aniyah Yisrael, let them, if I need to hire workers, I'd rather have Jewish labor in my house than an Eved Knani who's a partial goy. So Rava declined to buy this Eved. So the Eved went and he to Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, another rabbi, and he bought him. Yom Echad, one day, as Rav Papa Bar Shmuel was giving him instructions, do this, do that, Yom Echad, Ashken Maya, please give me some water to drink. Also, he took the water, and he whitened his hair and his beard, meaning he used the water, basically he shampooed the dye off his hair and his beard. And now he looked like an old man. So now he told his boss, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel had bought him, Chazi, look, I'm older than your father. You're giving me these menial tasks. Like, what are you giving me this work? Look, I'm an old man. So Rav Papa Bar Shmuel said, oh, what did I buy over here? Tzaddik mitzar nechlitz, the tzaddik Rava who declined to buy him was rescued from sorrows, from trouble, because he didn't buy him. He's a tzaddik. And somebody else took his place. I'm the somebody else. In other words, Rava was smart. He didn't buy him. I bought this guy, and look, I was fooled. That's an example of coloring a person to make him look younger. Right? That's why people dye their hair to make them look younger. Oh. Yeah, that's money from the Eved, right? From the Eved. Well, maybe he was from Master, or maybe he sold himself. Maybe he was a guy who sold himself as an Eved. Yeah, you could say Mekachtos, maybe he would, but maybe he did have recourse. He bought from somebody else. He go back and say, you sold me a guy, and it turned out he was old. But that's the story. But maybe he didn't have recourse to him with him. That ends the Parak Hazov, which talks about Anah. Here we're going to talk about the next parak is talking about ribis, interest, usury. Now, the pasuk says in Vayikra, there's another pasuk in Bar, which we'll discuss tomorrow in more detail, that pasuk. But the pasuk in Vayikra says that you shouldn't, if your neighbor is poor, your fellow is poor, you help him out, but don't take ribis. Don't take neshech b'tarbis. You just fear God. Okay, that's talking about probably in a case where Rashi says where maybe you fool him and thinking you're allowed to take ribis and either give ribis or take ribis from a goy, but you might say, oh, this is goy's money, and fool somebody. God knows. But the main pasuk, the next pasuk of Lamed Zayin says, as don't give your money for usury, and don't give your food for rebid. Now this pasuk is speaking to the lender, right? If you lend him money, don't take any ribis from him. Don't give your money for neshech and marbis. What's the difference in neshech and marbis? They're both really, the Gemara is going to say they're both the same thing. Neshech means you're biting the borrower, you're biting him, and marbis means you're increasing you're increasing your money on his money. And what is ribit? Ribit min haTorah is only when you lend money to somebody. I lend you $10 and I want back $11, right? That's ribit. That's ribit min haTorah, and it's neshech to the person who paid it. It's ribit to the person who received it, right? It's marbit, but it's both the same thing. It's just two ways. It's two sides of the same coin. So why did the pasuk call neshech and tarbis? We'll see why. But the basic idea is you can't have one without the other. I can't collect interest if you're not paying interest. They go together. The Gemara is going to say, are they two different things? We'll see. It's really the same thing, but it's looking at it from two different viewpoints. But even though this pasuk is talking about taking ribis, this pasuk in Vayikra, the pasuk in Dvarim is going to talk about paying ribis. The isser is on both of them. The isser is might say, well, I had to pay it. I had no choice. No. You can't pay ribis to a Jew. It's not just the person who's taking the ribis, the lender. It's the borrower. The isser is on him too, as we'll see. So first the Mishnah says, as if we're saying, oh, what's neshech? Pasuk talks about neshech and tarbis. Are they two different things? Like we're assuming that. So the Gemara says, what's neshech? Sella. You give a sell. A sell is 4 dinners. I'm lending you 4 and give me back 5. So I'm lending you 2 bushels of wheat and I want back 3. Also nation noshech. That's neshech. Ezu tarbis, which as if to say that's rebid. That's you're biting it. Ezu, what's tarbis? Hamabra paris, you're increasing your produce. Ketzat. So it gives an example. Now we're going to see in the Gemara. This is not really tarbis as opposed to neshech. Neshech and tarbis are the same thing. One you're paying, one you're receiving, but they're both the same thing. Both of them refer to ribid. So what's this case of Ezu tarbis? What's ribis drabanan? What's ribis drabanan? Again, midaraisa, it's only when you have I'm lending you 10 and want back 11. It's a loan and it's a fixed amount. I know what I'm going to get back. But here's in the case of drabanan. What's that? Amar pays case. The dinner zav. Let's say I say, listen, it's a purchase. I'm giving you dinner zav, which is 25 dinners for a kur, for that measure. I'm buying. I'm buying a kur of chitin for 25 dinners, and that's the market. That's the market price right now. You're allowed to do that even though the seller doesn't have the wheat right now, but he could buy it because that's the price. That shar means that's the market price, so he can go buy it anyway if he wants to and supply him. But he didn't have it right now. Meanwhile, you're allowed to do that. If that's the price, I'm allowed to buy. It's not even a drabanan. If if I buy from you and you don't have it right now, but I bought it to you at the fair market price right now. Later on, when I wanted to collect it, right? When I wanted to collect it, I paid you for it. And now they're worth 30 dinars. That instead of 25, went up to 30 dinar. Amaloi says, "You're not giving me my wheat. It's worth more now. Remember, I paid you 25 and you agreed to that price. Well, now it's worth more. That's okay. Why do I want my wheat? Because I want to sell them. When I want to sell them, there's a little profit involved. I pay 25, I'm getting 30, and I want to buy wine with it. Amalo, I'll tell you what. I'll consider your wheat worth 30, and I'm lending you the 30, but I don't have the wheat now. And I will let you buy. I will give you 30 measures of. I'll give you wine worth 30 dinars. I don't have any wine. If I had the wine, I that would be okay right now, because even though the price of the wheat went up from 25 to 30, that was okay. It wasn't a loan; it was a purchase. And at the time you gave me the 25, it was worth 25. I could have bought it for 25 and given it to you right then, but I didn't. Now it went up to 30. Now you're claiming your wheat. I could just give you the wheat, even though it's worth 30, but I don't have the wheat. And you want to buy wine with it, and I'll say, okay, I'll give you 30 dinars worth of wine. If I have the wine, that's okay too. I don't have the wine. And we're afraid that when I have the wine, the price will have gone up by then. Since I don't have the wine, there's no shar to yet. That's already in Drabanan. We'll talk about this case in more detail in the Gemara. That's the Mishnah. That's also to do, but that's really only also Drabanan. The Mishnah is confusing the way it reads, because it says that Neshech is, I'm lending 4 for 5. I'm lending 10 for 11. Ribbis is this complicated case. Not really the case. The Gemara says Midashav Ribbis Araisa. But compares Drabanan, since you're leaving Ribbis Araisa, that is the first case, 4 for 5, or 1 bushel for 2 bushels for 3 bushels, whatever. That's Ribbis Araisa. I'm lending you something, either money or produce. I'm lending you X amount and I'm getting back Y. That's Ribbis Araisa. And then you start to explain this Ribbis Rabbanan, where I gave you 25 dinners for the wheat, and that was the shar. Then it went up to 30, and then I wanted to buy wine with it. This whole long thing. What's going on? Mechal Da'araisa, the Neshech with Abschatz Mashma, that Neshech and Ribbis is one thing. Why didn't you say Neshech? What's Neshech Da'araisa and what's Tarbis Da'araisa? Why didn't you explain as two different things? Since you didn't do that, it's Mashma, Neshech and Ribbis are the same thing. I Va'kroi Ksive, Neshech Kesef Ribbis Ochel. Right? Va'kroi Ksive, the pasuk says Neshech Kesef Ribbis Ochel. What does it say? It says, as Tasbachalosit Neshech, don't give out your money for Neshech. Over Mamzos Nechel Smashma, that maybe food, when it comes to interest of food, that's called ribit, harbit. And when it comes to interest of money, that's called neshach. So aren't they two different things? Neshach refers to money, and ribis refers to getting more in case of food. Is there anything? How can you say when you're biting the borrower without increasing the lender? In other words, you can never have one without the other. How can you say one neshech is you're hurting the borrowers getting bitten, and ribis is where the creditor is making more money? Is it possible to have one with the other? Can you have one without the other? Neshech below tarbis. How would you have neshech without rebit? Right? Rashi learns to talk about prutas, tosas, so talking about isers or mos. But the idea is, if I lent you 100 and I went back 120 prutas. So what's going on? Mikora kind meya bedanka. Originally, that 100 prutos is worth a danka, which is the equivalent, which is a sixth of a dinar, which is also a mo'ah. If originally 100 went for a danka was worth 100. L'basov kaimi meya b'asrim danka, and now a danka is worth 120 prutos. So neshech ika. Why is there neshech? Because you're taking away from him. The kashakal mine midi the low midi l'yov, because you're taking something you didn't give. You gave him 100 prutos, and now you're getting back 120. V'tarbis leka, and maybe you're not getting ribis over there. The lesle ravcha, because the creditor is not gaining anything. The danka say the danka kashakal, because originally he gave him a danka, which was a sixth of a dinar or a ma, and now the same 100 prutos is worth 100. The same 100 prutos, which was a danka when he lent it to him. Now that same danka buys 120. So he might say, okay, the creditor didn't get any more. He gave him a danka and got back a danka. But so at the end, what are you looking at? If you're looking at it originally, originally he gave him 100, right? And he got back 120 prutos. So there's neshech and tarbis. If you're looking at the end, that the originally a danka was 100, now a danka is 120. If you're looking at the end, low neshech, low neshech, because he gave him a danka and gave him back a danka. So What do you mean? Again, are you looking at the prutas or are you looking at the danka? Either way, you can't have one without the other. How would you have tarbis without neshech? If you're talking about he lent him 100 and gave back 100 mikarakaim, meya bedanka. Originally, danka was worth 100. Meya b'chumsha, and at the end, 100 prutas would go for not a sixth, but a fifth of a dinner. Fifth of a dinner is more than a sixth, so he's getting more. Again, he bought some mikars as lunches. If you're looking at the prutas, you gave him 100, got back 100. There's no dashach, there's no tarbis. If you're looking at the end, meaning at the danka, so tarbis, because you gave him a sixth of a dinar, and you got back a fifth of a dinar, so that you're giving him back more. So there's neshech and tarbis there. In other words, you can't have one without the other. So what do you mean? What's neshech and what's tarbis if it's two different things? Because the pasuk says, you're right that the pasuk says neshech when it comes to money and tarbis when it comes to food. But tomorrow's Gemara is going to explain. But there's other psukim in Devarim also. There it says lo titanu neshech ochel neshech kesef neshech ochel neshech kol davar yishach. So we know that neshech applies to all kinds of stuff, money and produce, and the same thing, extra psukim for tarbit. So at the end of the day, neshech and tarbit are the same thing. Rava says there's no such thing as rebis without neshech, tarbis without neshech, or neshech without tarbis. The reason the pasuk says two different things is al titain es kaspel neshech, marvelous nachlecha. Really, there's tarbis on kesef also. And really, there is neshech on food too. There's neshech and tarbis on everything, food, money, everything. There's both. So there's no difference between neshech and tarbis. There's two ways of looking at it. So why did the pasuk say it twice? Why didn't you just say the lov and the malva shouldn't do neshech? The answer is to say that you're over on two lavin. Ella lava b'shnei lavin, to tell you that you're over on two lavin. If you do ribis at all, wherever you do it, whether it's food, whether it's money, whether it's lend me 2 hammers, I'll give you back 3 hammers, whatever it is, whenever there's ribis involved, you're over on 2 lavin, neshech and tarbis. There's like 2 lavin over here, you're over a double. Tomorrow's Gemara here from Tana Rabbanan at the 3 lines from down on page will discuss all these psukim to show you that all items apply to ribis and to neshech equally, because they're both, whatever you do, whenever you take usury, you're both over. The lova and the malva, they're over on 2 lavin in each case. On Tuesday, Mitzvah Shem, after Yontif, Israchag, we'll pick it up from the last line on tomorrow's daf. I'm going to use like the last few words on Daf Samachala from the base. We'll pick it up from there. Chag Sameach L'Kulam, and I'll put up Rumi. I'm going to put up also today. I'll put up Samach Beis also for the people who keep 2 days. Yontif.
Thank you.
Have a good Yontif.
Have a good one.
Both of the